Senator Kyrsten Sinema is saying goodbye to the Democratic Party. She revealed her decision on CNN's Jake Tapper's show last week. Let's watch.
I've registered as an Arizona independent. I know some people might be a little bit surprised by this, but actually, I think it makes a lot of sense. You know, a growing number of Arizonans and people like me just don't feel like we fit neatly into one party's box or the other.
Sinema further added that remaining in the Democratic Party was not true to who she is, and so she's taking herself out of the partisan structure, providing what she says is a, quote, place of belonging, end quote, for people in Arizona and across the country who are tired of partisanship.
The first-term senator's decision is not so surprising. After all, she kicked off her political career as a Green Party activist. Though her move is unlikely to change the balance of power for Democrats, she has received a few verbal tongue lashings. Arizona Congressman Ruben Gallego blasted her decision in a statement saying, quote, unfortunately, Senator Sinema is once again putting her own interests ahead of getting things done for Arizonans. And Senator Bernie Sanders didn't mince words about her departure either. Here he is on CNN's State of the Union on Sunday.
I happen to suspect that it's probably a lot to do with politics back in Arizona. I think the Democrats there are not all that enthusiastic about somebody who helps sabotage some of the most important legislation that protects the interests of working families and voting rights and so forth. So I think it really has to do with her political aspirations.
Sinema is up for re-election in 2024. It remains to be seen whether Democrats will nominate someone to run for her Senate seat in the next election. Here to help us unpack all of this, Democratic strategist and political commentator Ameshia Cross is back with us. Good to see you again, Ameshia. It's been a couple weeks.
Glad to be here. It was a bountiful holiday season. Ate way too much for Thanksgiving, but glad to be back with you.
Glad to have you. So help us unpack this. So my reading of Sinema's motivations, yes, transparently political. If she gets primaried, she would, in the Democratic primary, she would probably lose. She runs as an independent. She can't get primaried because she's not a Democrat anymore. And then she has to almost dare Democrats to run their own candidate, and in a race where there'd be her, and then a Democratic candidate, and then a Republican, in which the Republican might win if you split that vote. So it's almost like she's daring them to fight her in a way that could cause a Republican to get that seat.
You know, Robby, we never fully agree 100%, but I think that here you are exactly correct. There's a political calculus that Kyrsten Sinema made. She knew she wasn't going to win a Democratic primary. That's been done for over the past year and a half because of some of the decisions that she's blatantly made while in office. A lot of those were forcefully against things that Democratic Party voters actually supported in Arizona. And as that party becomes more diverse, it becomes younger, as it becomes more, I think, leaning left of center, she was going to have a harder time. And to be fair, she was somebody who ran as a left of center candidate when she actually got elected under the Democratic banner. A lot of what she's done since she's been there has been flagrantly against the very things that she stood for when she was running. So she knew she wasn't going to win again. She decided to make this announcement on the heels of Democrats getting that 51 Senate margin when it came to winning that seat for Raphael Warnock in Georgia. She knew that she could suck the air out of the room. She also knew that, to your point, even if, as an independent, she's not able to make it across the aisle, which she probably won't in Arizona, it gives a little bit of a leg up to a Republican in the sense that it at least makes that race a little bit more competitive. Not saying a Republican will win, because Arizona has been kind of a toss-up state over the past few years. But I do think that she realizes that she can really wrangle this party in, and she's doing everything she can to do.
Batya, I think this was such a power move. I think she basically said, oh, yeah, you want to try me, Democrats? Okay, then maybe a Republican wins this seat. Think about that. I think she's just daring them to blink, and they might have to back down.
I have to say, I feel a little bit like I think that she has the reason I think that this was so smart is because, you know, in McCain land, when you run a Kari Lake, right, an independent suddenly becomes a lot more attractive, right? Mm-hmm. There's a deep divide in the GOP in her state. And I think that is definitely something that she has recognized. I mean, it seems likely to me that she will be able to peel away a lot of GOP voters who could not bring themselves to turn out for somebody so extreme, right? That divide in the GOP is very real, just like it is on the Democratic side. My thing is this, you know, I think that an independent to me is it's to me what they're doing is they often end up in the wrong quadrant. And what I mean by that is that what you have in America is, a third of Americans who are, socially liberal and economically liberal. And then you have a third of Americans who are socially conservative and economically conservative. And you have a third of Americans who are socially conservative and economically liberal. And that was really Trump's base, people who are socially conservative, but who are working class, let's say. And so they want to see an economy that works for the bottom just as much as it works for the top. And then you have 3% of Americans who are like you, Robby. They're socially liberal and economically conservative. And I think that is sort of the box that, independents often end up in, which is the box that has no constituency, as opposed to the forgotten third of Americans who really deserve more attention. All right, Robby, let me have it.
Wow, that's pretty harsh. I think I have no constituency. Well, we'll see. As someone, I guess, Sinema who reflects my constituency, I think she just made a move to make herself much more likely to remain Arizona senator, actually in a state where probably my constituency is a bit more numerous and a bit more powerful. Independent.
She's a political foil. She's not someone who is a quintessential independent. I think that people have to remember that. This is somebody who planned. This is somebody who got a lot of funding from Republican groups, to be fair, not independents, Republican groups, for a lot of the initiatives that she was working against while she was having a D in front of her name in the Senate. This is a woman who recognized she couldn't win a primary. She's not an independent. She's an individual who's an opportunist.
Bernie Sanders doesn't get to complain about someone being an independent. Bernie Sanders
definitely is not the person to speak out on this.
Yeah.
Full agreement there. But I do think that there is something to be said here. And Bernie Sanders, for the most part, attempts to caucus with Democrats anyway, as will Kyrsten Sinema, because there is no worth in caucusing with independents. She fully recognizes that as well. Yeah. So the pivot here is largely because she wants to prove to Democrats, one, that she's still relevant, two, that 51-seat margin they thought they had, they no longer have. But in addition to that, to try to shake things up in Arizona. I think they're going to be smart enough not to run a crazy as a daisy candidate a second time as the Republican leader, but who knows? I think the Republicans are going to pivot now from what they saw in the 2024 midterms because, quite frankly, a lot of those crazy candidates couldn't win.
And Batya, to your earlier statement, it does matter how you poll these things. Like, you can ask Americans, do you like higher taxes? Do you like more regulation? Those would be the economically liberal positions, right? Those aren't going to be popular things. If you ask things that way, do you think government should be smaller, more focused locally, less bureaucratic, more that government is best, which governs least? I think you're going to find huge majorities supporting those views. Then when a policy, it gets a little messier, and then our political figures are always so imperfect, even when they will gesture at those views and then totally sell them out all the time. So I think it's a little bit more complicated. Although I take your point that the protectionist but also socially conservative was a voting bloc that was not well understood at all. That is a real thing and was not well understood by our elites. I agree with you on that.
Yeah, I think, right. So the question is, how do you define economically liberal? You're 100% correct. To me, what the economy the Democrats seem to be pushing for is one in which, the knowledge industry is in the top 10%. Everybody makes good money. And then there's no manufacturing here anymore. All of that is done in China so that we get cheap product. And then all of the service industry is done by, Venezuelans who we bring in to essentially do slave labor. And then the 90% under the 10% are living on universal basic income. Like, that's not really, to me, economically liberal. Economically liberal is what Trump did, which was say, we're going to close that border so that we can have a wage floor. We're going to wage a trade war with China so that we can protect our manufacturing, and we're going to start reshoring and encouraging companies to bring back good working class jobs. So I totally take your point. The way that each side defines what would be economically left is very different. But I imagine, Robby, you'd be very comfortable with this vision, aside from the UBI, with the vision that the Democrats have now.
Batya, you chose violence today. There's no way around it.
No, I say this all with respect, Robby. I totally respect where you're coming from. And I think it's a really important counterpoint. You always challenge, it's very important to have obviously the free markets are incredibly important. We know that capitalism is what has brought us every single civil right revolution that's happened has been accompanied by capitalism. But, sometimes it can go too far.
I am totally okay for discussing how to smooth out some of the of capitalism's sharper edges or deal with the people left behind, et cetera. It's funny. I think so many of our viewers, so every now and then I read the comments, perceive you and I as like agreeing on everything, even though we have, and like me and Brianna disagree on everything, even though you and I have wild differences. We just, in our last couple Mondays, it hasn't come up as much. Ameshia and you probably have differences. You and I have differences. We're all over the place.
I mean, that whole economic breakdown that Batya just gave, I was like, oh, where do we end this sermon? At the end of the day, I think that in the type of economic system that we have, in one that is based on capitalism, there are always going to be winners and losers. There are always going to be high-skilled workers who have a skill that is in demand and opportunities that are in demand versus individuals who do not have skills that are in demand. But I think that what the Democratic Party has been working on for quite some time is to ensure that there aren't people who essentially get left behind. Technological advancement in and of itself has reshaped our economy, and there's no stopping that. But I do think that there should be a such thing as people who are able to afford to keep a roof over their heads. Maybe they're not going to be living in downtown DC, but able to keep a roof over their heads and sustain and not be on the streets or have to work 3 and 4 jobs to make that happen. That is the crux of the Democratic Party's argument. It's not that everybody is going to be on the same playing field. We essentially can't do that. Everybody's never going to get paid the same. Everybody's never going to have the same benefits. But on that same token, we want to ensure that individuals are able to raise their families in this country, and they don't need to have 2 or 3 degrees. They don't need to be in an industry that only allots for the top 10% of the nation. They need to be individuals who, back on Main Street, are able to take care of their families, are able to buy groceries, are able to not have to sacrifice between being able to pay for pharmaceutical drugs like insulin and keep their lights on. I think that's a very feasible argument. And it frustrates me, quite frankly, when people try to take it outside of that vein. As somebody who grew up in an impoverished household with a single-parent mom who raised 4 kids on her own, I think that watching her and the work that she did to do that, which many thousands of people do across this country every single day, is quite frankly upsetting to watch it get harder and harder for individuals to keep their heads above water and the argument be, okay, well, they're just not doing enough. Because that's what it sounds like coming out of the Republican Party.
Well, there's so much credentialing we do now that's driven by the government that makes it so much harder for people to do hard work, to get educated, and they get a good job, because you have to get a really expensive degree, and then you got to get a really expensive master's degree, and then you have to do all these hoops that we keep, the society, and then also through government policy that we keep erecting that are just totally counterproductive. What policies did we have in place, 30 or 40 years ago, where that was much more accessible to move into the middle class and the upper class if you did the work, and you could afford to pay your way, and you could make that happen. So let's relax some of the policies that have gotten us wildly off that path, is what I would say. So, all right, well, we got to leave it there. We'll have more Rising right after this. Stay with us.